Alright, we are recording for the next space station video. This one's going to be kind of fun, but first things first. This is NGC 6530 and is what I've been using for the space station videos, and it's just such an amazing image. Link to the original is in the description below, and there's another link there as well for something I'll be getting to shortly. So in this video I want to talk about Lagrange stations, which I mentioned in the quarter station video as I recall. It's been a little bit since I recorded that one. So what is a Lagrange station? Well, in my Catherineverse, I already have space stations. I've already talked about those, where these are more or less meant to just be in like floating cities in dark space, so outside of a star system. And it makes sense, in that we would have those, and that they'd be pretty large. But Lagrange stations dwarf them. In fact, they dwarf basically everything except for planets. Because of what their actual purpose is, which is their ports. They are massive, massive ports, mainly for already well-developed planetary colonies, or Earth. So the idea is basically, hey, we're going to have a whole bunch of commerce going between a planet like Earth that is completely well-developed, and like some of the earliest colonies that, again, very well-developed. There's going to be so much going in and out that you're going to be using very, very large ships, so you need very, very large ports. And so these are designed specifically for that, as a sort of remote port from the planet, because you can't just take the ships, the cargo ships there, and then like land them on the planet. That's not viable. And you can't necessarily have massive space stations in direct orbit of a planet either, because they'd be so big it could be a problem. You'd have small space stations there. So the Lagrange stations are actually in very special orbits that, hopefully this will work. There we go. Okay, I need to change that a little bit. So this is the NASA page talking about what Lagrange points are. I'm just going to try to align this well. So Lagrange points are special gravitational phenomena, I guess you could put it. And as you can see, we have 5 points here. I'm not going to be able to reach all the way over to 3, but as you can see, L1, L2, L3, and then 4 and 5. So what's special about these is if you have an object in one of those orbits, it's stable relative to the other objects. So for example, if you put a satellite, and we do have several, that's why they have it marked there, in the L2 orbit, relative to the Earth and the Sun, it's always there. It's always on that line and at that position, at that distance. Even as, yes, the Earth orbits around, well, this follows the orbit of Earth. Same thing for the L1, which is over there, and then the L3 further out. All along that line. And lower down in this article, it talks about how 1, 2, and 3 are technically, they are stable, but they're not completely stable. So that they are to a degree unstable. L4 and L5, those are stable, but those are where my Lagrange stations are. But my Lagrange stations in the fiction, in the science fiction, that's what those are. But that's more so just. Well, those are more stable points. I picked them, though, just because I think it makes sense to have these massive stations at those that are further away, but not other side of the orbit like L3 is. So how massive are these? Well, I believe I did mention that the classic Mercury design of ship that Roman, in a letter from Catherine, he uses, is so large that in order for him to dock with the main space station that he visits, the one that's basically a big city, a floating city, that he has to have like a special piece going out, that he can't just park directly against it because it would block too much of that space station. Not a Lagrange station. Those things are so big, he can park that thing directly up against it. It won't interfere with anything. As large as that ship is, and I'm pretty sure I already described, classic Mercs are so large, you can't really visualize how large they are. Like, you can't look at it and have a sense of how big, because it's either empty, so now you can see all the way down, but so much of it is just empty space, because it's a superstructure ship that's like, whatever, and then if it's completely loaded, it's like, well, you can't see all the way to the end. Like, it would be measured in cubic kilometers, and the Lagrange stations can have multiple of those directly docked against them. They're huge. And yeah, I guess I don't really have too much of a problem admitting that I like the idea of having some of my stuff where it's like, it's just, how big is it? It's just big. How big is it compared to this? I'm going to say it's bigger than that. Is it really? I don't know, but I'm just going to say it because I can. It's my fiction. Let me have that win. It's stupid, I know, but give it to me. Um, but yeah, and so they are in those points, the L4 and L5, with the L5 being the quarter station, because I'm assuming that it's rotating. Actually, why would I assume it's rotating counterclockwise? But actually, no, I think it does say, if we look down here, that it does actually specify which one is which. Okay, L4 leads the orbit and L5 follows. So yes, the quarter station one is actually in L5 because it's behind. I talked about that in the quarter station. But yeah, so it is just these are really massive. One other thing that I'm pretty sure I did put in the book, I know I thought about it because I remember it. I don't think I moved it. Is that they are so large that the solar wind itself, it's like a massive solar sail, and so they get pushed out of orbit and have to occasionally push themselves back in. Although that might not be necessary based on what's explained lower down. And hey, I know I'm going a little bit off of notes, so I just want to look back at this to make sure that I'm hitting some of these points. Okay. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna do it that way. So why does this necessarily exist? As I said, you wouldn't necessarily want to have such massive space stations in more direct orbit with Earth, much closer to Earth, like say within the orbit of the moon or near the orbit of the moon. And so it would be so hard. It's also then they're constantly moving as well. So, relative to other things. So it's L4 and L5, that stability there also helps with that, because then it's like, oh, it's always in that direction. So you can have shuttles, and that is canonically what I have in there. There's constantly shuttles going back and forth from 4 to Earth and L5 to Earth, or rather satellites in orbit of Earth. Constantly moving cargo back and forth, constantly moving people back and forth. But one thing that I want to add for a little bit of the real inspiration to this, the real thinking on reality, is there are super tankers out there that are so massive that when they are fully loaded, they can't actually go into ports, at least not every port. That they would be too low in the water, that the ports, I mean, you're coming up near land, so there actually, is a bottom there. You can't bring them in because they would just run aground. So what actually happens is there's spots out, like in the ocean or in the sea, depending on where the port is, that just has lines connecting all the way out from the port to this point, so that then you can hook the ship up and unload whatever it has, and then load it back up. So it actually never comes into port. It's kind of like that, although you would have almost all your commerce going to 4 and 5, going to these Lagrange stations. Excuse me. It wouldn't just be the really, really big ones. There might be some small ships, but for the most part, especially for Earth, you're expecting so much commerce, just run it all through them. And the more like terminal stations that would be orbiting the Earth that are much smaller and more like no one lives there, no one stays on there for very long. It's just you go there. Like if you're on Earth, you might go up to one because that's an easier route going there and then coming back down somewhere else to move around Earth. We'd go there to then pick up something that'll take you to another star system, or go there to then go to a Lagrange station and head out. Yeah, and it's that is actually, I'm not sure which chapter it is, but that is actually in the book. I do describe that because Roman does come in. The book, ends with him arriving at Earth, and so he does stop at a Lagrange station, drop things off, goes to Earth because he has some business there, takes a shuttle there, has some time on the terminal stations, as I'm calling them here. I don't remember what I called them in the book. But that's essentially what they are. They're like terminals for a bus or something. And then, goes down to the planet, and it ends with him on Earth, but he'd just have to go in reverse. I'm just trying to think. I know there's one other point I want to share. Is that all I got left? I think so. So, well, before getting to that, one thing I want to add, because I did say at L2 they do have, we do have some spacecraft there. One is actually the James Webb Telescope. We actually put it there because it's away from the sun, but it's still, you can always collect energy from the sun, unless, unless the Earth is blocking it. But it can always have the sun at its back and always be looking out into deep space without having to block out the sun. You don't want to aim something like the James Webb at the sun. You will destroy it. But it does mention actually in this article that at L1 you do have some solar observatories, or used to have them. I know it mentions Soho. Here it is. Yeah, it's the current home to the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory Satellite. how old is this? Hang on, that's from 2023. I thought Soho shut down. Oh, 2018. That sounds right. But I think that's where we have Stereo, which is another solar observatory. That I'm pretty sure replaced Soho. I just don't remember Soho still working. But here, let's quickly talk about this. Then I'll get to the one thing about the actual design, the shape of the Lagrange stations in my fiction. There's a reason why they're triangular. They are. It is described in the book. There's a reason why. It's a little. No, it's not a little. It's very obscure, but it's like a little bit of fun that I had. So I do want to explain this. So this image here, and yes, I know this is a little bit of a real science piece instead of science fiction, but the Lagrange stations are very much for me something where it's thinking about real concerns and having them solve it. So I would come to the reality of Lagrange points and such for that to help solve these problems. So what this is it's a diagram to give us an idea of how stable these orbits are. It does seem a little odd how some of this is, but it's like 4 and 5 are actually stable because of the blue arrows pointing out, whereas 1, 2, and 3 are not stable, even though you do have the red arrows pointing in. Why would the arrows pointing out make L, 4, and 5 stable? Well, it is kind of explained here. I think it might be easier if you click the link and look at it yourself than try and read it in the video. The reason why is because if you have an object in L4 or L5 that starts to become unstable, it starts to fall out of the orbit, because of the arrows pointing out like that, that means it's going to speed up. And that speed will actually direct it to come back in to the Lagrange point. This, if I'm remembering my differential equations, which was 16 years ago, 17 years ago, something like that. They at least sound to me like they are singularities, in that in differential equation you have a singularity where it's just once you're basically in it, things just always tend back towards it. You can't really escape, at least not easily. It'll always walk back. It sounds like that's kind of what they're describing here, just not in that language. So even though, yes, you would start, they actually do liken it in the description here to the top of the hill, but it's like you speed up and the only way you can slow back down is to come back to the top of the hill. Whereas L1, 2, and 3 are saddles. So, there's a point you can fall down, but there's also the points here. So even if you were to start falling down and speeding up, well, you could go up like that and exit. Versus, nope, only way to slow down is to come back up to the top. Probably not the best description, but Lagrange points are a well-known phenomenon, so you can follow the link here, and also if you just do a search for Lagrange points, you will be able to find more information on them. And they really are a pretty neat discovery that Lagrange made in his paper here from 1772. Okay, so coming back to this camera view. So why are they triangular? Why did I decide to make the Lagrange stations, these massive stations that orbit the sun and Earth? Why would I choose to make those triangles? Well, it's actually a reference to another story that I had started writing and stopped many years ago. Well before I did any of the Catherine stories, in fact. And yeah, it's a reference there because in that story, I was thinking about Dyson spheres. And specifically how to build one. I could probably do another video at some point just talking about Dyson spheres, because I have some problems with those designs, with what is described for a Dyson. I should explain what a Dyson sphere is. So, it is a hypothetical structure that would be a sphere that completely encompasses a star. So all of the energy from a star is being captured. It's a really neat concept, and I've never seen a depiction of one that I liked. So, in this story where it's like, hey, I'm going to be working with the Dyson spheres, I kind of was like, yeah, I want to fix some of those problems. And one of them, the one that is the reference here, that the triangular shape is a reference to, is how do you build these things? And I decided that what would make the most sense is if you build them in sections that can then be connected back together, or that can then connect together to form the sphere. Triangles. So you would just make a whole bunch of triangles that would then just assemble together around a star to do that. So the Lagrange stations, it's kind of just an in-joke for me, but it is also, in theory, you could interpret it as humanity at this point, even though there is no way they're doing a Dyson sphere. None. These things, they would be science fiction for science fiction. That's how insane a Dyson sphere actually is. But it's like they're still like trying to think about that, and so it's like, okay, well, the Lagrange stations are the biggest things we're gonna make are gonna be in orbit. We'll make them the triangle, so at least we're learning from that. So who knows? Maybe one day they do build yet another that connects in to extend the Lagrange stations out. But it's unlikely they would necessarily do that because, I mean, the Lagrange stations are already so massive, it's hard to imagine needing another one there and connecting it out. But, yeah. And one thing, just continuing with the Dyson spheres, there's a reason, because how I said they're science fiction, even to science fiction, there is an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called Relics, which is a really fun episode, where they find a Dyson sphere, and then this is never mentioned again, but they are in awe of it. It's like, this is the crew that's already experienced things like the Borg, and it's like the Dyson sphere leaves them in awe because it's like, these things are like, how the hell do you ever make these things? Because they actually have done the math. It would take more mass than what is in the solar system outside of the sun to make one to encompass the sun at the orbit of Earth. I mean, it's really, really big, lots of mass. So to actually design one for building and then actually building it, yes, it would make any Star Trek be like, it is insane. So yeah, but as I said, I had problems with them. That can be another video, but that's not going to be soon. Not going to be soon. I'd want to get back to working on that story, and I got no idea when I'm doing that. I got other stories to work on first. Anyway, I'm just trying to think. I think I can just stop here. I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing next with space stations. I'll think on it. There's a lot of interesting topics there. Only thing is, they're not in my current story, so I'm not giving so active thought right now. But we'll see what I have for you next week. See you then.